Hello, welcome to the Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Flesh Eater Courts and why they're incredible to play and also how to play them. It's an older book. It was released, I think 3 years ago now, maybe 4 years ago. It's one of the oldest books in Age of Sigmar. We're pretty certain it's going to get an update at the end of the year, along with a model range refresh. But the start collecting is still available. You can see that here. There it is. And me and the Twitch chat are going to be reviewing this book. We're going to be talking about the ways to play it, all the little combos you can do, and hopefully you're going to learn how to do that through this video. And we're going to be taking into consideration the new General's Handbook. So the new General's Handbook just came out a few weeks ago, and along with the General's Handbook, where we got loads of new rules and primal dice for wizards, we also got a battle scroll update, which is kind of like an FAQ or a patch to a game. And what that has done is it allowed us to have different rules for things like coherency and how characters can be targeted that might really benefit this army. And in addition, this book, well, the Flesh Eater Courts Battle Tome, this new book came out, The Harbingers, and in it, there are updated rules for some of the units that you'll find in here, specifically Crypt Ghouls. There's a new character in it. He's a marrow guy, which is pretty fun. So we'll be going through all of those. But I guess the first question is, why should you play Flesh Eater Courts? Well, the story's pretty awesome, as me and the chat have been talking about. They're a bunch of ghouls, obviously, who are deluded. They have delusions, so they literally have a disease that puts a delusion across their mind, and they think that they're good guys. They think that they're knights and courtiers and all sorts of fancy lads around the realms. But actually, they're just eating the faces off people, which is kind of like a fun backstory. They're an incredible combat army with loads of damage, some of the most aggressive monsters in Age of Sigmar. And if you wanted to, you can take incredibly small units like Crypt Ghouls, which are only 160 points. And from a unit of 10 of those, you can generate like 100 attacks doing tons of damage if you can stack all the combos correctly. They've got summoning, which is quite fun, and allows you to have a lot of board presence. They've got a little bit of healing in there as well, which is also super cool. They are an older book, though, so they do have some janky rules compared to some of the newer books. But I think that they're a great combat army, and you can load up on some units and do just apocalyptic damage, like combo breakers. Just if this was a Capcom game, it'd be like combo breaker, combo breaker, combo breaker. They used to do tons of damage. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the video. I'm recording this live with the Twitch chat, and it's probably going to be over the course of several hours. So I do hope you enjoy the video. And if you do, you could support the Honest Wargamer on Patreon. That'd be great. The first thing we're going to look at are the battle traits. So this is what you get. These are the special rules you get for your army if you're building an army that's all Flesh Eater Courts. These are the battle traits. So these are going to apply across your whole army. First one we'll talk about is Deathless Courtiers. You can see it there. And this is each Flesh Eater Courts unit in your army has a ward save of 6+. How does this work? Okay, so you do damage, then you make armor saves. And after armor saves, you work out how much damage you've done, you collect it in a pool, and you take a ward save, 6+ ward save. Which is okay, it's not terrible. It's not as good as Games Workshop seem to think it is. It's definitely not something that you build your list around. If it's a 5-up ward save, maybe, but it really isn't something that you tend to do. So 6-up ward save, that's fine. It's just a nice additional thing to your army, especially as this army is quite squishy, as in it can't build real big defensive blocks. It doesn't have a very high armor save. It doesn't have access to lots of different debuffs, and so you're probably going to take a lot of damage in this army. So a 6-up ward save is nice. Now, the Grand Courts, these are the 4 different sub-factions you can take, and then there is a way to build your own sub-factions as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we're going to talk about the commandability. So this is available to you across your whole army again, and it's called Feeding Frenzy, and it's pretty much the linchpin or the crux of how Flesh Eater Courts armies play. Like I said, they're pretty much a combat army. There is some shooting. We'll talk about that later. Well, screaming, really. But Feeding Frenzy is this like massive damage potential, and what it is, it's a commandability. And uses commandability in the combat phase after one of your units has fought. You get to immediately pile in and attack again with that unit. Now, this is quite different as it's an older book, because some of the more modern books, like you see with Iron Guts from Ogres, or you see from Chosen from Saves to Darkness, they have a pile in and attack twice, but they have it at the end of the combat phase. But those are written on their war scrolls. This Fight Twice ability has been a amazing ability for Flesh Eater Courts armies, because it just means you can just do a ton of damage. As we talked about already, a lot of how you build this army is going to be taking a single unit, stacking tons of different attacks on it, and then making it fight. So we should talk about a couple of things here, because there's some really fun techie stuff about this. First up, let's just point out the fact that you get to pile in again 3 inches. So you take a unit and you charge. Now, if you charge 2 units into a unit at the same time, and the first unit fought and wiped out that other unit, you would still get to make a 3-inch pile-in. So that's the thing you really need to remember, because if you've done a charge, you always get to make a 3-inch pile-in. So there's some real clever tricks there where you can do a 3-inch pile into a unit behind the other screen if the other unit attacked. But you could also do the same thing with Feeding Frenzy. Charge a unit in, kill a unit that's screening the unit behind it, and then pile in another 3 inches and then attack the unit behind that. So effectively it's got a 6-inch pile-in. Doesn't mean it's got to kill stuff, but this army doesn't normally struggle to kill stuff. So that's really techie. So if you want to defend against it, you have to be at least 6 inches behind. If they're doing a multi-charge, you might have to be up to 9 inches behind that front line, which is pretty nuts. So that's just something to be really conscious of. So that's Feeding Frenzy. It's really good. It's also command ability, though. And since this book was released, command abilities suffer a little bit because there's loads of ways to shut down command abilities. First one we're going to talk about is Roar, which is a monstrous action that happens at the start of the combat phase. So if you are charging into an enemy monster, they could just roar you, which means on a 3+, you cannot receive a command ability, meaning you can't use Feeding Frenzy. This is pretty bad. However, recently, in a Warcry Warband update, they released a unit called the Royal Beast Flayers. You can see them here. Now, we're going to talk about these more in detail later, but importantly, they have this ability called Hunter's Instincts, where enemy monsters within 3 inches of this unit cannot carry out monstrous rampages. In addition, reduce the damage characteristic of weapons used by enemy monsters by 1, while they're within 3 inches of any friendly units with this ability to a minimum of 1. So built into this army, we have a counter ability, which is brand new, a counter ability to stop enemy monsters from roaring you, which means you're more likely to do Feeding Frenzy, which is good. There are other ways, though, to shut down command abilities, and this has been something we've seen quite commonly added into armies as Age of Sigmar 3 has got older and older. The most dangerous one probably right now is Geminids of Orgish, which is a endless spell, which any army can take, and currently is criminally undercosted. And I did make a video already about endless spells in this GHB, and it's already the best endless spell. Like, it's so good, and it means that you can't do command abilities until the next hero phase if you're hit by it, and that's going to really mess your army up, because again, like we talked about, you really want Feeding Frenzy to go off. So you need to be aware of the things, and there are loads of other units that can shut down command abilities as well. There are spells like Tzeentch have a spell. There are spells like in Lumineth, for example, where they double how much CP you have to spend. So this is something you need to be really conscious of when you're playing with this army. You need to save command points for being able to do Feeding Frenzy, and you need to make sure that they can be somewhere where Feeding Frenzy isn't going to get turned off. So it's a really powerful ability, but it's very manageable, and that's really difficult for you as a budding Flesh Eater Courts player, a new delusional fella on the tables. The next part of the army we're going to talk about is its faction terrain. So this is a free, not to buy obviously, but free in points piece of terrain that you bring along for your army. It's effectively allegiance abilities that just is a model. And we'll talk about how to use it now, because it's pretty interesting, and it's very, very vital in this army. When you set it up, you can set it up just outside of 3 inches of the objective, and it has to be set up in your territory. So that's pretty good, because it's got an AoE aura we're going to talk about in a minute, and it's also got another ability to summon stuff. But putting it so close to the front lines is a bit of a problem, because in this General's Handbook, or in this version of Age of Sigmar, the monsters in an enemy army do have the ability to smash your terrain feature to rubble. So you do want to be cautious of that. So I think it's quite interesting, because you maybe want this on the front line, but also you don't want it to get smashed, so you're going to have to be really conscious of that. Now, it's a defensible piece of terrain, and it can be garrisoned by one Flesh Eater Courts hero with a wounds characteristic of 8 or less. Being a garrison means that that character is going to have +1 to their armor save, and also be -1 to hit, which is a good bonus. And it's got 2 abilities. The first one is a Ghoulish Landmark, which is while enemy units are within 12 inches of any terrain feature in this scenery rule, it cannot be affected. They cannot be affected by abilities that help them ignore battle shock tests. So you have to take battle shock tests if you're within 12 inches of this scenery feature. And because you can put it quite close to an objective, that's quite a large aura. It's not wholly within 12 inches, within 12 inches. A lot of the units in the game right now have fairly low leadership at the top end, not OBR obviously, but some of the other armies are quite affected by this. And because some armies are very aggressive, like they want to charge towards you, baiting them into being near this terrain feature so they then are affected by ignoring battleshot tests is great. So that's good. That's a really nice ability. The other ability is Ruler of All He Surveys. Now, this is one of the key features, key ways the army works. So this terrain feature is really important, but it's also quite difficult to manage. While a friendly Flesh-Eater Courts hero is garrisoning a terrain feature, so you probably always want to start the game with a character garrisoning the terrain feature. This seemingly rule, friendly Flesh-Eater Courts units wholly within 12 inches of this terrain feature can issue summon men-at-arms, summon Courtier, summon Royal Guard, and summon Imperial Guard commands without a command point being spent. What the hell is that? Okay, on each one of the Flesh-Eater Courts heroes, or most of the Flesh-Eater Courts heroes, they have the ability to do a summon. So if we look at someone like an Abhorrent Ghoul King, you can see that they have the Summon Men-at-Arms command ability. You can use this command ability at the end of your movement phase. If you do so, you pick a friendly model that has not used this command ability, and then you can summon a unit of up to 10 serfs. They have to be wholly within 6 inches of the board edge, 9 inches away. So you get a once per battle summon from most of your characters, including characters like your Abhorrent Ghoul King or Royal Terrorgeist, who are your big frontline combat units. So you're going to be able to summon units, which is cool. And as long as there's a unit garrisoning that terrain feature, friendly heroes within wholly within 12 inches of it can do that for free. And as we already talked about, the main way you use this army is to be able to make it fight twice in the combat phase. So that's going to require you to spend a command point. So there's a couple of like negatives and bonuses. Number one, this means that your army doesn't have to summon to spend as many command points as it would if this wasn't around to do all of its summoning. And all of its summoning is really good because it gets you a load of extra units. So it's good for that because it reduces your resources. But it does mean, because you do it at the end of the movement phase, loads of your units have to be stood around this terrain feature. Number one, that really reduces how fast you move, and that's a huge problem. But also, it does mean that you're susceptible to someone doing a lot of AoE damage or just kind of pinning your army in at that part of the board. So if you have all of your characters around, and there are some army lists where they do a bunch of targeted damage in what we call area of effect, so like explosions basically, and they just drop mortal wounds. Probably the worst version of this right now is obviously Seraphon, but there are Stormcast lists that do it the same. So that's something you've got to be conscious of, and if you are up against one of those armies, it's probably best to just spend the command points to summon your units versus be stood around that bit of terrain. So pretty good. Ultimately, you get a character, and all of the units that are going to be stood around there are probably going to be wizards, who you probably want moving along with your front line. So it probably forces you to do a lot of that summoning early, which means you don't necessarily get quite the surprise advantage your opponent has. So anyway, pretty good terrain feature. Obviously, you're going to bring it with you anyway, but this is something you should definitely think about a lot. The next part of the allegiance ability is heroic actions. Heroic actions are done at the start of the hero phase, and Flesh-Eater Courts have a heroic action called Muster Reinforcements. Muster Reinforcements lets you pick one friendly Flesh-Eater Courts hero and roll 6 dice. For each 2+, you can return one slain model to a friendly serfs unit within 10 inches of that hero, and for each 5+, you can return one slain friendly Knights unit within 10 inches of that hero. So let's talk about it. Serf units are Crypt Ghouls, which are your battle line like units. They come in units in 10. They're very, very squishy. They don't have a good armor save, and so they'll just die in droves. And the Serf keyword has also been applied to the Royal Beast Flayers, which is the Warcry warbrand we talked about earlier, and we'll review all those later. So you can return those models. And then Knights, for each 5+ that you roll on those 6 dice, you can return Crypt Flayers and Crypt Horrors. And they've got a lot of wounds. That's really good. I think it's 3 on the Flayers and 4 on the Horrors. So you can potentially return a lot of wounds to a unit, which is really good. A couple of things which are really nice about this is the heroic action is separate to rally, so you can also do rally as well. But rally can't be done in combat, which is a command ability you can do at the start of the hero phase to heal models in your army. And instead, rally is done. Rally can't be done if you're in combat with that unit. This can be done if you're in combat with a unit. Also, the courtiers in an army, also, when we talk about those later, they also do healing as well, or what we call recursion, and return models into an army as well. So you have got a great way of summoning loads of units, and we talked about that already. You're probably going to start the game with like a 2,400 point army, 2,500 point army, because of all the summoning that you're going to do using your terrain feature. And then with this heroic action, and heroic action can be done in each hero phase, so my hero phase and the opponent's hero phase, so you can do this twice. So you just got to make sure, but it's got a limited range. 10 inches is rough, but it's not wholly within 10 inches, so you're going to have to make sure that you've always got a hero nearby. I think that's going to be the only difficult thing to maybe talk about this. And also, it's still dice dependent. You're rolling 6 dice. But if you spike really high, you take a unit of Crypt Horrors that's nearly dead down to 1 model, and then you do a rally and you return 2, and then you do this and you roll 2 5-ups. You're going to put this 4 models back into that unit. So it goes from a unit that's basically over to a unit that's right back in the game. It's just wicked ability. Just a quick note of clarity. The Muster Reinforcements heroic action can only be done in your hero phase. So you're only going to be able to do that command ability that heroic action in your hero phase, not in every hero phase. So that's a distinction, super important to point out. I'll put that out there. Okay, so we're going to talk about the sub-factions and the kind of generic sub-faction that you can build. There are 4 sub-factions: Morgaunt, Hollowmorn, Blistercorn, and Blistercorn, great band, along with Gristlecore, the other hardcore band that you can play. Now, the problem with these 4 sub-factions is that they are locked, because this is an old book, so they are locked into making you take a command trait and making you take your first artifact. Now, if you take an enhancement, which is a battalion, or if you take a battalion that allows you to take an extra enhancement, you could take another artifact, but you're pretty much always going to be locked into that command trait. So what you can do if you want is you can kind of build your own sub-faction with the Courts of Delusion. And then you can then choose from the pretty massive list of command traits and artifacts that are generically available. So yeah, that's kind of how the sub-factions work. Now let's talk about what are in those sub-factions. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Courts of Delusion. So again, you cannot take any of these, you can't take one of these delusions if you're having a sub-faction. So if you're choosing Morgaunt or Hollowmorn, you can't roll for a delusion, okay? And you're not going to roll for a delusion. The rule says you can roll for a delusion, but on your army list, you're going to write down that you chose one of these delusions, unless you're feeling very primal, in which case you are going to take a delusion. Okay, so what have we got in here? Okay, there's pretty interesting ones. First one is Crusading Army, which is add 1 to run and charge rolls for friendly Flesh Eater Courts units. All of these delusions pretty much apply to most of the army. This is really good because, as we talked about previously, you can summon units, and being able to summon those units 6 inches on the board edge, 9 inches away, means that you get +1 to the charge, making an 8-inch charge versus a 9-inch charge, really changing the math on your ability to get those charges in. So if you're looking to do some deep strike mechanics, also +1 to run and charges is just generally good anyway, especially in a meta where you're doing redeploys. +1 to charge is great. Royal Hunt. You can reroll hit rolls and wound rolls of a 1 for one of the attacks made by a friendly Flesh Eater Courts unit that target a monster. So you can reroll hit rolls of 1 and wound rolls of 1 for attacks by friendly Flesh Eater Courts units that target a monster. Now, this is actually kind of good because you can generate a ton of attacks. So being able to reroll 1s to hit and to wound means you're going to get more attacks through. But problematically, this is only targeting a monster, and unless for some reason the whole game becomes about monsters, which it isn't anymore. When giants were a thing, that was a thing. But it's not, and because it's locked to only doing it to monsters, it's not very good. Feast Day, once per turn, you can use Feeding Frenzy command ability without a command point being spent. This is probably the most popular one. I think a lot of Flesh Eater Courts players will say that this is life and this is love, because you are going to be so CP dependent. When this book was released, there wasn't as many command abilities that you can do now, like things like redeploy, all-out defense, all-out attack. These are new command abilities. So being able to use those command abilities are really important. In some cases, especially with redeploy, game winning. And so being able to do Feeding Frenzy without a command point being spent is really good. Also really good if people are trying to debuff you, make you spend more command points to use a command ability is also something that happens in the game. So that's really good, and that's why it's so popular, because it keys into the key way this army plays, Feeding Frenzy. Then you've got a Matter of Honor. You can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by friendly Flesh Eater Courts units that target a hero. If that target is a general, you can reroll wound rolls of 1 as well. Now, This isn't really good for the same reason targeting the monster isn't really good. You got to target heroes, and then you got to target your general to get the most value out of this, which isn't great. But it's kind of interesting because it doesn't say that it's keyword locked to just melee attacks. So you could do missile attacks. And we kind of talked about the flayers, so the crit flayer unit, who do have a shooting attack, which is 10-inch range. It's got 4 attacks. Per model, so 12 attacks from the unit. They hit on 4s, they wound on 3s, it's Ren 2, damage 1. But they move 12 inches and they shoot 10 inches, which is a 22-inch threat range. So if you start targeting a hero and you hit on 4s, and with an all-out attack, you can reroll 1s. You're hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s. And then if it's the general, then you'd be wound on 3s, rerolling 1s, Ren 2. It's not a lot of damage, but it's an interesting one, especially because there is a battle tactic, which we'll talk about later, which you achieve if you destroy an enemy unit with screams. We asked ourselves if we thought we were in a hero meta. We probably are, but still this isn't that good. But it's interesting to think about. Then you've got the Grand Tournament, which is you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for attacks made by friendly Flesh-Eater Courts heroes that other than your general. Your general is probably always going to be a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, because he gets all this value from the command traits and stuff. So probably you're not going to take that. And then you've got Defenders of the Realm. You can reroll save rolls of 1 for friendly Flesh-Eater Courts units that have at least half their models wholly within your own territory. Save rolls of 1 would be great if you're running things like Chaos Knights or Chaos Warriors, because they have a great armor save already. You have a terrible armor save, so rerolling armor saves of 1 is not very valuable at all. So I wouldn't take that. Right, now we're going to go and look at the command traits. So these are the command traits which your general can take. But if you run any of the sub-factions, your command trait will be locked on your general, so you won't be able to choose these. So these you're going to see quite rarely. And we're going to go through these now. So you've got Bringer of Death. You can reroll wound rolls for attacks made by this general. Don't forget this is going to be the general. And these are all, sorry, I should also point out, all these command traits are only for abhorrent heroes. So an abhorrent Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, an abhorrent Ghoul King on Zombie Dragon, an abhorrent Arc Regent, and an abhorrent Ghoul King. Now, the abhorrent Arc Regent, and we'll talk about why in a bit, is an auto-include. You're always going to start your army list with an abhorrent Arc Regent in your army. So it's a pretty good one to be looking at the command traits and artifacts you can take for those characters. And an abhorrent Ghoul King on Royal Terrorgeist is a terrifying thing, and we'll talk about that more later. But let's look at what we got. So, Bringer of Death, reroll wound rolls of 1 for attacks made by this general. Now, that sounds really great, but it won't be your mount. So, if you wanted to be an abhorrent Ghoul King Royal Terrorgeist, you're not going to take that. Because you don't get to reroll the attacks on the mount, which is where you're going to get a lot of damage. Then you got Frenzied Flesh-Eater. You can reroll hit and wound rolls for attacks made by this general if there are any models that have suffered any wounds with 3 inches of this general. That sounds great again, but you're not doing the same thing. What you're looking for from a command trait, and I've said this in multiple videos, is you're looking for something that lets your unit scale. You're looking for an economies of scale buff. Or something that makes lots of units good, not like a singular unit. Unless that unit is like meta-defining or like, army-defining. But in this case, none of those things do that. Savage Beyond Reason. If the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with a melee weapon, the general is a 6, that attack inflicts 2 mortal wounds on a target instead of 1. Make a wound and save roll for each hit. That doesn't benefit us at all either, because that doesn't do anything, because again, that's just some extra damage. Then you've got Majestic Horror. If this general is chosen as the model that uses a command ability that summons a Flesh-Eater Courts model to the battlefield, they can use it without a command point having been spent. Same thing. Again, that isn't a benefit at all, because you can just be near a unit, near the Charnel Throne, to be able to just do that for free. And you've got Dark Wizardry. Add 1 to the casting, dispelling, and unbinding rolls for this general. And this is amazing, especially in the current GHB. Because in the current GHB, we've got Primal Dice, #Primal. And primal dice are really important because you get to add a d6 to your casting value, but if you roll a double 6, your opponent can't stop it, but then you can't cast any more spells. If you roll a double 1, you suffer a primal miscast. But a flat +1 is really good, especially to dispelling and especially to unbinding, because you can roll a d6 for either of those. You can add primal dice to either of those 2 rolls either. So this is really, really good. And it's also really good because you can take it on a unit, the Abhorrent Arc Regent, who you're always going to auto-include in your army. And the reason you're going to auto-include him is because you get to cast a spell with him. So adding anything to the casting roll is really, really good. So Dark Wizardry is excellent. And it also combos with 2 battle tactics. There's a battle tactic in the new GHB, which is to cast a spell and your opponent doesn't stop you. The best tactic for that is just to be outside of 30 inches, but having pluses to cast is going to be a bonus to that. And also having bonuses to dispel and unbind is also going to stop your opponent achieving that. Then also there's a battle tactic for unbinding and endless spell, which this is also really good as well. And then finally, you got completely delusional. Once per battle, if this general has not been slain, you can pick a new delusion in your hero phase to replace the original delusion you chose for your army. This is kind of okay if you want to try and build like a tricksy build army, but I'm not massively a fan of this. And of all of them, Dark Wizardry is my pick. So we're going to look at the artifacts now for abhorrent heroes. And again, those are the abhorrent Ghoul King or Royal Terrorgeist and the one on the Zombie Dragon, the abhorrent Arc Regent and the abhorrent Ghoul King. Now, as we already said, we're always going to see the abhorrent Arc Regent in the list, and probably most of the time, always an abhorrent Ghoul King on Royal Terrorgeist, because they're like the big punch unit in our army. They're the Bloodthirster, the Stonehorn of this book. There are 6 different artifacts you can take, and again, if you're going for a sub-faction, the first artifact you take is keyword locked, or it's locked in the one you have to take. But if you aren't, then there's some really nice combos you can do here. Don't forget, you always get 1 free artifact in your army, and also, if you take one of the battalions, you can get an additional artifact, which is really great. So the first one is the Signet of the First Court. If the unmodified wound roll for an attack made by the bearer with a melee weapon is a 6, add 1 to the damage inflicted by that attack. Again, that's just going to be the bearer. It's not going to apply to the mount. So it's just not good. Like, it's fine, but it's not great. Then you've got Splinter Vein Brooch. Subtract 1 from the casting rolls for enemy wizards while they're within 18 inches of the bearer. And in this particular GHB, in the current game we're in now, this is amazing. Specifically because everyone's trying to do a bunch of different spells. They're trying to do Hoarfrost, which is increasing the efficacy of loads of little units. They're trying to do 46 mortal wound spell, which is cast on a 12. And so making them have to use primal dice where they might potentially primal miscast is a really good shout. Some of the spells in this game are going to wreck you. And as we already talked about, we don't want people casting things like Geminids into our army, because that's really going to mess us up. So this is good, and you're going to have to put this on like a frontline character, so it's going to have to go on one of your big monsters that's going to run forward and get in a fight. But I think that this is legitimately should be something you maybe think about taking. The next one is Blood River Chalice, which is once per battle at the start of your hero phase, the bearer can use this artifact. If they do so, heal up to d6 wounds, which is hilarious when Soulblight Gravelords heal 6 every combat phase on their characters, so this is terrible. It's just of its time. Then you've got the Grim Garland. Now, a lot of love for this in the chat, so I want to make sure I point that out. Subtract 2 from the bravery characteristic of enemy units while they're within 6 inches of the bearer. Now, there's something like kind of good and bad about this. It's good because it ties in really nicely with the Scream that you get from a Terrorgeist, which does mortal wounds. So if you look at it here, the Death Shriek has an ability where you roll above the bravery and you do that many mortal wounds. And while that's kind of okay, and we'll do some mortal wounds, it doesn't now work with Flayers who've had their War Scroll updated. So I don't think it's as good as it was before, where you would have Terrorgeist and Flayers all doing their shouts and doing a ton of different damage. Now it's only going to affect certain units, and so I don't think it's as good as it was. The Dermal Robe is probably my favourite pick of the 6, which is add 1 to casting, dispelling, and unbinding rolls for the bearer. If you combine this with the command trait we talked about previously, you're going to have one unit that's on +2 to cast, +2 to dispel, and +2 to unbinds. If you were to then take a battalion, a core battalion, and then take the Splinter Vein Brooch, you would be at +2 to cast, +2 to dispel, +2 to unbind. I'll make sure I use the right words. +2 to unbind, while they're at -1 to cast, giving you an advantage of +3 to what you previously were at. Then, when you add primal dice in, I think you're in a good spellcasting place with this army. And this army really wants to cast spells as well. This army wants to cast spells and do command abilities. So if either of those two are shut down, they're in a bad place. And then the final one is the most primal, and therefore the best one to talk about in this GHB. The heart of the Gargant, the liver of the donkey, the gizzards of a lizard wizard. And this is once per battle. At the start of the combat phase, the bearer can use this artifact. If they do so, they reroll failed wound rolls for the bearer and then mount that phase. So it doesn't have quite as much of an overarching impact as the Splinter Vein Brooch and the Dermal Robe, but it is going to allow you to reroll the damage on your big, fighty, abhorrent Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, which is pretty good. And it's very primal, so let's do that. Let's do that. Definitely Dermal Robe and Splinter Vein Brooch has to be the winners here, in my opinion, mainly because you want to cast spells and you want to shut down spells, and having that big points difference is going to be really important. So those are the big winners for me. Now we're going to look at the command traits for Courtier heroes. Those include the Crypt Gas Courtier, the Crypt Haunter Courtier, the Crypt Infernal Courtier, and the Vargulf Courtier, and Duke Crack Marrow. Now these are, was described in the chat, these are healing wagons. Their job is to use the muster ability, which we talked about. There's a heroic action, which is a bit like muster, and then all of these characters have muster on their war scroll, which is going to let you heal or return models into friendly units. So they're going to be running behind them most of the time. So that's their job or their role in the army. But these are the command traits you can take if one of them wants to be your general. Okay, so we've got a Bringer of Death as a command trait. You can reroll wound rolls for attacks made by this general. All of these characters are foot characters that aren't very fast, so they're not going to get into combat very quickly, and they also don't do tons of damage, so don't want that. Frenzied Flesh Eater, reroll hit and wound rolls for attacks made by this general. If there are any enemy models that have suffered wounds in 3 inches of this general, again, same, no, we don't want that. Savage Beyond Reason is the unmodified hit roll for an attack made by the melee weapon by this general as a 6. That attack inflicts 2 hits on the target instead of 1. Make a wound roll and save roll for each hit. Now this might be quite useful if we're going to make a smash bat, which we'll talk about in a minute, and kind of fights for a Dark Acolyte in that role. Then you've got Hulking Brute. Add one of these general's wounds characteristic. They've got so few wounds, don't bother with that. And then Cruel Taskmaster, if this general uses the muster ability, you can re-roll the dice for this general that determine if a slain model are returned to units. This might be quite good if you're going very focused on making sure you return models to a unit, especially if you're taking a unit of, let's say, Crypt Flayers or Crypt Horrors, which are multi-wound models, and you're buffing them up to a unit of 9. You might want to make sure that when you do start to return models in that unit, you effectively do it really, really quickly. So this might be something you focus on. And then you've got the Cruel Taskmaster. Well, that's one we talked about. Then you've got Dark Acolyte. And then this is the general gains the wizard keyword and can cast and unbind spells in the same manner as an abhorrent Ghoul King and the abhorrent Ghoul King's war scroll. So there's a couple of things to talk about here, because making a unit a wizard that wasn't previously a wizard is good, because that means you're going to gain access to a bunch of spells like Mystic Shield and Arcane Bolt, and also be able to choose a spell from the spell lore for Flesh Eater Courts. But also, in this current GHB, it also means you're going to be an Andorian Locus in most cases, which means you have 9 wounds or less, and you aren't a unique character. So out of the list, it's only Duke Crack Marrow that won't be on the list. The rest of them will be able to become Andorian Locuses. By becoming Andorian Locuses, they also are going to get to choose the spells from this GHB, which is the Lore of Hoarfrost. And so they're going to be able to take some pretty good spells like the Lore of Blizzard. No, it's not called the Lore of Hoarfrost. It's called the Lore of something else. But you're going to be able to take the spell Hoarfrost and also Merciless Blizzard. So one of them does 4d6 mortal wounds, and one of them allows you to get a D3 characteristic change. The one you're probably looking for is Ren 3. So that's quite good. So Dark Acolyte feels like that's actually pretty decent as a general command trait, which is quite fun. Something really fun to talk about in here, we'll talk about now, is if you were to stick this on a Vargulf Courtier. And you can make something called a smash bat. So Vargulf Courtier is 160 points and 60 mil base. It's got 4 attacks, but when we get round to it, there's a way to add up to 4 attacks to this unit from spells. Then, with the King's Champion ability, you get to add an additional 2 attacks, taking them to 10 attacks. You can give them all out. You can give them all out attack, which is going to give them +1 to their attack characteristic, means that they're going to be hitting on 2s. And also, you can make it so their finest hour, a heroic action to be finest houred once per battle. Then they get to add +1 to their wounds characteristic as well. So we hit on 2s, wound on 2s. And if we take one of our sub factions we talked about earlier, what we can do is if we target an enemy hero or an enemy general, we're going to get reroll 1s to hit and reroll 1s to wound. Now, if we are a wizard, then we can do a flaming weapon on our guy, which is a generic spell that you can take. And that means they can take his Immense Claws profile to damage 3. And then finally, if we cast Hoarfrost on this character, then we can make them have Rend 3. So you would end up with 10 attacks, fighting twice, because you can use the command ability to pile an attack twice, hitting on 3s, hit on 2s, rerolling 1s, wound on 2s, rerolling 1s, rend 3, damage 3. So 30 damage, and then pile and attack twice, do another 30 damage. But in order for that to happen, you need to commit to having your command trait be on this 160-point model that's got 8 wounds and a 5-up save. You're going to need to cast up to 4 spells, maybe 5 spells to make that happen. So it's not something very reliable, but it's something very fun. And you could create this absolute missile, which I think is really interesting. The other version of this is if you don't take Dark Acolyte, and instead you take Savage Beyond Reason, you still would get those 10 attacks, but instead every time you roll a 6, you do 2 mortal wounds instead of making it so you get +1 damage. So I probably wouldn't take any of these, and instead I'd be taking +1 to cast, like we talked about earlier. But it's fun knowing you could build some really fun, like, missile combos out of this unit. So I like that. That's good. That's really, really good. Really, really fun. Good point being brought up by the chat, and I should reinforce this, is obviously you couldn't use all-out attack, which you use in the combat phase, and also use Feeding Frenzy, which is a command ability, because you use both of those in the combat phase. When you use a command ability, you can't use a command ability more than once in a phase, unless there's something that says that you can. So that's something to point out. So yes, you wouldn't be able to do both of those two things. So you can also take artifacts for that list of characters as well. So the Crypt Gas Courtier, Crypt Haunter Courtier, the Crypt Infernal Courtier. So these are the artifacts you can take. You've got the Keening Bone, which is pick one of the bearer's melee weapons, increase the range characteristic of that weapon by 3 inches. None of these units are overly good, other than maybe the Smash Bat, our good old Vargulf Courtier. So no, don't take that. You got Medal of Madness. Once per battle, the bearer can issue the at the double, forward to victory, and inspiring presence command from the core rules as if they were a general and without a command point being spent. It's once per battle and it's ACP. That's a no. It's not very useful at all. The Flayed Pennant, you can reroll charge rolls for friendly flesh-eater course units holding within 12 inches of the bearer. Now, that isn't actually that bad because this is an army that wants to charge, so rerolling charges feels like a bonus. So I think that would be pretty fun. But still probably not what you take. Like, it's an option. The other two aren't options. That's on the list of maybe options. You got the Carrion Wand, which is honestly so terrible. Like, in your hero phase, the bearer can attempt to cast the Arcane Bolt spell as if they were a wizard. If they're a wizard, add +1 to the casting roll, which is so bad when you have another artifact that's just +1 to all of the casts that you do. So this is very bad. You got the Flesh Form Raiment, which is subtract 1 from the bravery characteristic of enemy units while they're within 3 inches, which you could double up with the Grim Garland from earlier, so a unit is -3 to the bravery. So if you wanted to shout at them or try to cause them to run away from battle shock using endless spells like Horrorghast or Geminids, then maybe that's a really good call, but I don't think I would take that, and you've got to be within 3 inches as well. And all of the characters that can take this are quite squishy and aren't going to survive more than a turn. And then finally, you got the Bilious Decanter. Once per battle, at the start of the combat phase, the bearer can use this artifact, and if they do so, add 2 to the attack characteristic of the bearer's melee weapons in that phase. So this is pretty important, especially if we're talking about the Smash Bat we talked about earlier. Remember, we got him up to 10 attacks, re-rolling to hit. Then now we're going to be on 12 attacks. Hitting on 3s, re-rolling 1s, wound on 2s, re-rolling 1s, rend 3, damage 3. But we have now committed all of our damage for a maximum, though, of 72 damage. We've committed all of our resources to make it happen. But, like, amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I think that's really fun. And you could do something really, really fun with that. The first subfaction we're going to look at is Blisterkin. Now, the ability you get if you're running Blisterkin, and by the way, I should also point out that if you do have Blisterkin as your subfaction, this makes Flayers be battle line. So Crypt Flayers, they become battle line in your army. Being battle line means that you can reinforce them twice. Normally you can only reinforce a unit once, so from these are coming units of 3, so unit 3 to unit 6, but because they're battle line, you can reinforce them twice, so you can take a unit of up to 9, which is really nice. The ability that you get in this subfaction is Blistering Speed, which adds 2 inches to the move characteristic of Blisterkin units. That's to make these units very fast. It makes Ghouls move 8 inches. It makes the Flayers move 14 inches. There's a command ability, which is effectively a teleport for a unit in the army. That unit has to be flying, but you do have the universal spell Levitate that you can put into your army, which is from the core book. So you can make any unit in the army fly and then do a teleport with it. The issue is you end up 9 inches away, And I don't really know why you would want to do that, to be honest. Your army can also already move fast enough, I guess. I think the only real reason to do it maybe is to do it on a unit of ghouls. But if you look at the spell, when we talk about spell lore later, there's probably a more reliable way of making that unit move closer to the enemy. Deploying outside of 9 inches is always a bit of a problem because a 9-inch charge is more likely to fail than succeed. So with a reroll, I think it goes up to like 52%, 48%. So it's quite unlikely. So allowing your whole game plan to work off this feels pretty weak. So I'm not a huge fan of the command ability. The command trait, though, is good. Hellish Orator. If this general is on the battlefield, at the start of your hero phase, roll a dice. And on a 4+, you receive 1 additional command point. For an army that wants a lot of CP, wants to use a lot of command abilities, especially because of Feeding Frenzy, this feels like it's very good. And then you've got the Artifact of Power, the Eye of Heesh, which is subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made with missile weapons that target friendly ballistic units holding within 6 inches of the bearer. Now, this is kind of worse than it was before the Battle Scroll update that we got recently. The Battle Scroll update has actually been a massive boon to the Flesh Eater Courts army. What it says is that if you have one of your heroes that's below 9 wounds and is within 3 inches of is it within 3 inches? Let me just double check. Within 3 inches of a unit with 3 or more models, within 3 inches of a unit with 3 or more models, then as long as it's not mounted, it can't be targeted by missile weapons outside of 12 inches. So one of your heroes, less than 10 wounds, near a friendly unit with 3 or more models, within 3 inches of them, can't be targeted outside of 12 inches. So being -1 to hit doesn't really benefit you in any particular way in that situation. And you don't have any characters that are that low wounds that are mounted. The only thing that this is going to benefit is your big monsters, and they definitely don't want to be shot. But since this came out, I think shooting's got a little bit stronger. Kharadron Overlord's obviously a very good shooting army. They're very offensive. There's lots of things like Blissbarb archers as well, which can do a lot of damage. So it's kind of okay, but I don't think in the current GHB this is actually a benefit. The current GHB has actually been a huge benefit, or the Battle Scroll update, to Flesh Eater Courts as an army anyway, because you're just going to be able to not have some of your main characters be shot outside of 12 inches. So, amazing stuff. Love that. So Bliskin, it's okay. Not a bad sub-faction. The next sub-faction is Gristlegore. The ability you get for running a Gristlegore army is Peerless Ferocity. This is if you're going to run a Monster Mash army. If the unmodified hit roll for an attack made by a Gristlegore hero or Gristlegore monster is a 6, that attack inflicts 2 hits on that target instead of 1, and make a wound and save roll for each hit. So you get what we call exploding 6s. Which is going to be very good. This sub-faction, you're allowed to take Terrorgeists and Zombie Dragons as your battle line units. Now, you still can't reinforce them. I know I did say that about battle line units previously, but you're not going to be able to reinforce those units. But they become your battle line. Now, I'm not overly a fan of riderless monsters. Games Workshop have never really written them very well. There's maybe an argument for having a bunch of them, but the reason this is going to work so well, the Peerless Ferocity ability, is because it just makes your Ghoul King on Terrorgeist so much more scary. It's going to make everything do a ton more damage, which is really why you take it. Then there's a command ability called Call to War, and this is effectively Death Frenzy or Fight on Death. And if your unit is killed, then you can fight on death. Now, there's some really important distinctions to make here. Most importantly, that it's a command ability. So you aren't going to be able to use the command ability to fight twice with this command ability, because they happen in the same phase. So you aren't going to be able to like die and fight twice, or fight twice and then die, which is a bit of a shame, to be honest. But this is good still, like really, really strong. Like if you get caught out in the wrong position, your opponent charges you, you still have a very good combat monster that's going to be able to do some damage before it is taken off the board. So you actually still got a pretty great bonus from this. So this is still very legitimate. You just have to make sure you have a command point available. You have to make sure you aren't roared, because that will stop that from working, which is really bad. So it's really good. It's really, really good, but in a few situations it can be really bad. Then you got the command trait Savage Strike, which is really excellent as well. This strike first effect applies to the general and their mount if they made a charge move in the same turn. This is really good because your big monsters are very fast. We are going to be able to give them run and charge. We'll talk about that in a minute. So charge in, do a ton of damage, and fight twice. So this is really good. Like, this is just a big missile, and it's just very good. And then you've got the artifact of power, Gurish Morshard. Once per battle at the start of the combat phase, you can pick one enemy model within an inch of the character and roll a dice. And if the roll is greater than the model's wounds characteristic, that model is slain. So you just auto-slay a unit, which is kind of okay. It's not bad at all. I got to say, Gristlegor is still as good. It's not as good as when it was first written, but it's still very good. You can take a massive combat monster, buff him up with loads of spells to do loads of damage. Then you can make them strike first, you can make them strike twice, and just blow a massive hole in the enemy army, which is honestly a major threat. And the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist is still, to this day, got some of the biggest output in Age of Sigmar, so this is a nice set of abilities, really. The next sub-faction is Hollowmourne, and in this sub-faction, Crypt Horrors become battle line, and Crypt Horrors have had an update in this book, the Harbinger's book, the Dawnbringer's Harbinger's book. So they have had an update. So we will talk about those when we get to the War Scrolls in a bit. So they become battle line. The ability you get is Shattering Charge. You can reroll wound rolls of 1 for attacks made by melee weapons, by friendly Hollowmourne Courtier units, and friendly Hollowmourne Knights units that have a charge move in the same turn. Those knight units are Flayers and Horrors. And I think we're going to talk about Horrors a lot in this sub-faction. Hollowmourne Courtiers are the Cryptghast Courtier, the Haunter Courtier, and you probably, if you're going to make a smash bat, a Varghulf Courtier is what you're talking about. The command ability in this sub-faction is Ravenous Crusaders. You can use command ability at the start of the hero phase. If you do so, you pick a friendly Hollowmourne unit, wholly within 9 inches of a hero or 18 inches of the general. Add 1 to run and charge rolls for that unit into your next hero phase. In addition to your next hero phase, that unit can still run and charge later in the same turn. So you effectively are getting +2 to their movement because you're always going to run and charge. Spend a CP, and you can make those horrors that we talked about, which start out at base move 7. They're effectively going to be going 15 inches and then be able to charge. If you use a CP, oh no, you won't be able to do both. Okay, you can use command at the start of your hero phase. Oh, you can do both. You can do Ravenous Crusaders and use the ability to auto-run 6. So you can do both together. So 15 inches and then charge. It's pretty fast, I'm not going to lie. The command trait for the general that you have in this army is add 1 to the attack characteristic and the damage characteristic of this general's melee weapons, while this general is within 3 inches of any enemy heroes. It's called Grave Robber. It's super cool. Any enemy heroes with an artifact of power. So if an enemy hero's got an artifact of power, you're going to get +1 attack characteristic and +1 to your damage characteristic, which is kind of fun. I quite like the idea of doing that. That's really cool. Especially if you can then add plus more to the damage characteristic, like we talked about earlier, if you make a smash bat. And then artifact of power is the Corpse Fane Gauntlet, which is after this model makes a charge move. You can pick one enemy unit within 1 inch of this model, roll a dice. On a 2+, that enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. So that doesn't really do anything. So as a sub-faction, it's quite interesting. You're going to get units going much faster. You're going to have a big brick of 9 Crypt Horrors potentially if you want to, or multiple units of 9 Crypt Horrors, or 2 units, sorry, which is fun. The Grave Robber artifact maybe means you can make a really fighty smash bat, which is quite cool as well. And when you do have those big Crypt Horror units, they're going to get to reroll wound rolls of 1 for attacks made by melee weapons, which is also good for them as well, because this is such an old book. It's 5 years old. It was released in 2018. It's got so many rerolls in it. So Hollowmourne seems really good, especially with the update to the Crypt Horrors, and the ability to potentially do Hoarfrost on them as well, which we'll talk about later. The last sub-faction we're going to look at is Morgaunt, and this is the one that is probably the most problematic because the book is so old, and we'll talk about why in a moment. We're going to talk about the Blood Loyalty ability, or Bloody Loyalty ability. You can reroll hit rolls of 1 for friendly Morgaunt Courtier units that are wholly within 12 inches of friendly Morgaunt Serfs, which are the ghouls. So if you're near ghouls or royal beast flayers, then your Morgaunt Courtiers, which are just like your dudes and wizards, get to reroll 1s to hit. So that's pretty bad and not really a reason to take it. However, the next ability doesn't currently work. In addition, while a friendly Morgaunt Serfs unit, and so again that would either be Morgaunt Serfs would be our Crypt Ghouls or royal beast flayers, is wholly within 12 inches of a friendly Morgaunt Courtier, its Boundless Ferocity ability activates if the Serfs unit has 10 or more models. Now, in the old Ghouls War Scroll, then you could have 20 models and something would happen. And this also happens in the current Ghouls War Scroll. If you have, you auto-wound on 6s to hit. so you don't need to roll to wound. And if you have 20 or more models, that happens on 5s. But this the Morgaunt ability doesn't interact with that because the way it's written, it doesn't quite work, and so that needs an FAQ. If I was to FAQ it, if you're playing this with your friends, I would probably say that what this means is that you are going to auto wound people with a unit of ghouls on 5s. But obviously that would be my FAQ, and this currently doesn't work in the game. So you're going to need to wait for an official Games Workshop FAQ, or you're going to have to speak to your local tournament organizer to ask what it is that they want you to do. So there's a problem there. Moving on to the next thing, the command ability, Heaving Masses, is also a problem here. So you can use the command ability when a friendly Morgaunt Serfs unit is destroyed. So again, Serfs would either be our Crypt Ghouls or our Royal Beast Flayers. If you do so, roll a dice on a 4+, a new identical unit that was destroyed is added to your army, set up new unit wholly within 6 inches of the edge of the battlefield and more than 9 inches away. So if I've got 30 Crypt Ghouls, you kill them, I use this command ability on a 4+, a new identical unit is destroyed. You cannot use this command ability more than once per phase. So this is a really nice way of recycling a big brick of ghouls and putting them somewhere else. Now, the reason that this doesn't work is because of Nagash. Nagash has had a War Scroll update in the OCR Bone Reaper book, and he has an ability called the Supreme Lord of the Undead, which is, at the start of the hero phase, you can pick one friendly summonable, Mordant or OCR Bone Reaper unit. And I know, like, on a personal level, I hate that everything in the Flesh Eater Courts book is, oh, by the way, these are serfs. Like, okay, cool, but you're talking about the serfs keyword is talking about Crypt Ghouls. You're like, okay, that's fine. And then the Crypt Ghouls themselves have the Mordant's keyword at the bottom of their War Scroll, and you're like, oh my god. And then Nagash's ability works on Mordants, which is so dumb. But anyway, what I'm effectively saying is Nagash has got an ability where when a unit is slain on a 3+, he gets to return that unit, but at half strength. So those 30 ghouls would return as 15 ghouls. I think rules was written now, and it has already been played at an event at Warhammer World, so no one has said that you can't do it. What's happened is someone has taken it so that 30 ghouls died, and then they used the command ability Heaving Masses to return 30 Crypt Ghouls, and they used Nagash's ability to return 15 Crypt Ghouls. So those 30 Crypt Ghouls turned into 45 Crypt Ghouls. So you ended up with more Crypt Ghouls, which is insane and doesn't really work at all. So that doesn't work and probably also needs an FAQ. And then finally, we've got the command trait Savage Chivalry, which you can reroll hit rolls of 1 for this general, while this general is within 12 inches of friendly Morgaunt Serfs unit. That's not good because you don't want the general to be in a fight, really. Like, maybe, but probably not. And then Decrepit Coronet, which is the artifact of power. Do not shake battle shot test for friendly Morgaunt units while they're wholly within 12 inches of bearer or 18 inches of the general. And this is great because you run in loads of ghouls, and your ghouls have got low bravery. So you're going to want this. This is a great little ability that you want if you're running loads and loads of ghouls. And I think running loads of ghouls is honestly very legit. So the command ability is nice, but it becomes a problem if you involve Nagash, which you can take in this army. And the artifact of power is really great because your units aren't going to run away. So just amazing. I think ultimately really cool. Like that a lot. And fun, but unfortunately we need FAQs on some of those bits. Right, we're going to talk about the spell lore now. So this is a spell lore for this army, and it's called the Lore of Madness. Now, don't forget, we are now in a crazy spellcasting place with primal dice in this GHB. And also, your wizards in this army are a little bit more safe because of the changes to Lookout Sir. So they probably won't get shot at range, which is also quite nice as well. So you're going to be casting more spells more reliably, and that's actually a huge bonus. So let's talk about what we got. We've got Bone Storm, which is cast on a 5, and it's got a range of 12 inches, and every unit in range on a 2+ suffers a mortal wound. You won't be taking this. Because a lot of the War Scroll spells for these army units are going to be the ones that you're casting, so and that doesn't really do anything. Spectral Host is one you're definitely going to be taking. It's cast on a 6, and if successfully cast, you pick a friendly unit wholly within 12 inches of the caster that's visible to them. That unit can fly until your next hero phase. If that unit can already fly, like a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, but also if you've cast fly, so levitate on a unit as well, that unit can run and charge. If you cast it on a 10, then you can pick up to 3 different units. Now with primal dice, this is going to be super easy to cast on a 10. So you can now have 3 units run and charge, which is pretty amazing. So if you wanted to do 3 big monsters like Terrorgeist or stuff, or if you wanted to have a Terrorgeist, and also if you wanted to try and cast like, levitate on a unit of ghouls and make them run and charge and get them running up the board, that's pretty funny. But like the new GHB has really opened up the fact that you can cast these spells on a 10 or more, and that's going to really change how fast this army is, which I think is good. Because previously you would pretty reliably cast it on 1 unit, and that 1 unit would have to run off on its own. Now you can cast it on multiple units and have a more aggressive army like Iron Jaws, which is cool. Then we got Monstrous Vigor, which is effectively a spell cast on a 5, and it lets your monstrous unit fight at the top bracket until the next hero phase, which isn't bad, especially on your most important unit, but they don't tend to bracket tons. So, like, it's not terrible, but it's not going to be really, really important. Miasmal Shroud is cast on a 5, and you pick an enemy within 18 inches and roll 3 dice. For each 5 up, they suffer a mortal wound, which doesn't do a lot. But if you roll a triple, then -1 to hit and -1 to wound. If you roll a double, then -1 to hit. -1 to hit isn't bad. Honestly, it's really not a bad debuff. 18-inch range is also a good range to cast that spell. Problem with this is, though, is you are relying on rolling a triple or a double on that cast roll, that roll, and it's probably not going to happen very often, so I probably won't take that. Deranged Transformation is cast on 6, and you pick a friendly unit with a wounds characteristic of up to 6 that is wholly within 24 inches of the caster and visible to them. Add that unit's wounds characteristic to its move characteristic until your next hero phase. For example, if the unit has a wounds characteristic of 6, you would add 6 inches to this move characteristic, and if the casting roll was 10 or more, you can pick up to 3 friendly units to be affected by this spell instead of 1. Now, this is going to work really well on something like Crypt Horrors, because they've got a wounds characteristic of 4, so that with their base movement of 7, you're going to be able to take that up to 11 inches, which is quite nice. And if we do Spectral Host, and if we make them fly and do Spectral Host, or if we take them in the sub-faction where they can run and charge, these guys can be going like 15, 16 inches across the board and then charging. So that's pretty good. It's not terrible. It's like... there's so many spells you want to cast in this army to buff your units up. That's how, use that necromantic spell casting to make this army stronger. I probably wouldn't take that. And then finally you got Blood Feast, which is cast on 7, and you pick an enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster, and it's visible to them, and a friendly Flesh-Eater Corpse unit within 6 inches of that enemy unit. The enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. If you've cast it on 10 or more, they suffer D6 mortal wounds. For each mortal wound you heal, you can heal a wound into that unit, or if they're a one wound model unit, like ghouls, then you can return a model for each mortal wound that you caused. So if you did 5 mortal wounds to the unit, you could either return 5 ghouls or heal 5 into a unit, which is pretty good. So, I mean, obviously the strongest one here is Spectral Host, because you're going to be able to make units run and charge. And we've already talked about the fact that this army wants to charge. It wants to do all of its damage in combat and run around. So I feel like that's really good as well. And Blood Feast also feels really good as well, because being able to heal those big monsters feels like that's something really quite useful as well. So I quite like all of those. We're going to move on to the War Scrolls, which is super exciting. And we are going to talk about the Abhorrent Arc Regent. This model, this unit is just an auto-include in your army. There's no way. Probably the best economies of scale unit in the game. Just does incredible stuff. Let's talk about why. He's got 7 wounds with a 4-up save, so he's going to be able to benefit from Lookout Sir. He's not mounted, so as long as he stays near a unit of 3 or more models, he's not going to be able to targetable outside of 12 inches. He moves 6 inches, which is fast enough, but he's not going to be going anywhere, which is cool. He's got a couple of abilities. Okay in a fight as well, with 7 attacks. 3s to hit, 3s to wound, Rend 1 damage 2. But that's really not why he's there. The reason he's there, that's the reason we'll just talk about straight away, is he's a wizard, and he casts 2 different spells. But the spell on his War Scroll is Ferocious Hunger, and this is why he's so good. Ferocious Hunger is cast on a 6, and if successfully cast, pick a Flesh-Eater Corpse unit wholly within 24 inches, which is crazy, and add the roll to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by that unit until your next hero phase. So you roll a d3. Okay, so incredible stuff. So 24 inches, great range. Wholly Within, that's amazing. That's most of the board. Cast on 6, much easier to cast, which is really good. In a world of primal dice, crazy easy. And then you add D3 to the number of attacks. So this is how you would take ghouls and you give them +3 attacks, or horrors and give them +3 attacks, or your Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, we'll talk about soon, you have +3 attacks to all of his weapon profiles, which is bonkers. He's also a 2-cast wizard and also an Andorian Locust in this GHB, which means that you're going to be able to add Hoarfrost as his chosen spell, and that means that you could then also be able to make a unit have D3 rend, or hit on 2s, or wound on 2s. So but that's kind of like a side note, but that's how I would load this model up. But that spell is just defining. You might even take 2 of this model specifically because you might want to guarantee that this model doesn't die. But thanks to New Lookout Sir, it's really, really good. So he's even more survivable than he was previously. So you are just going to get one of these, maybe 2 of these. He's got some other great abilities as well, specifically Imperial Blood. In your hero phase, you can heal up to 3 wounds allocated to this model. It starts with 7 wounds with a 4-up armor save, so that's pretty chunky for a wounds characteristic. Also with the heroic action to heal D3 in each hero phase if you're not in combat, then he's probably never going to die unless something could just do 7 wounds straight away from the back of the board, because he should be quite far away with a 24-inch range spell. And then finally, he's got the command ability Summon Imperial Guard. You can use this command ability at the end of your movement phase. If you do so, pick one friendly model that has this command ability and has not used it before in the battle. That model summons one of the following units to the battlefield. 1 Courtier, which consists of either a Cryptghast Courtier, a Haunted Courtier, Infernal Courtier, or a Varghulf Courtier. 1 unit of up to 3 Knights, which is either Crypt Flayers or Crypt Horrors, and then a unit of 20 Serfs, which is either Crypt Ghouls or Royal Beast Flayers. The summoned unit is added to your army and must be set within 6 inches of the battlefield edge and 9 inches away from the enemy. Now, lots of the heroes that we're going to talk about do this, and if you remember, when we go and talk about the terrain piece, if you're in the terrain piece and there's someone garrisoning it, you're going to be able to do this for free. Now, since this book was written, you would normally always just get 20 ghouls. It's pretty good. Maybe you would go for 3 flayers or something. However, in the current version of this book, you're going to take the unit of Royal Beast Flayers. And that's the new Warcry warband, and they are amazing for a couple of different reasons. If you're buying them in your army, they're 115 points, and they come in unit sizes of 10. Don't forget, if you are taking the Abhorrent Archregent, who's 240 points, by the way, but worth every penny, really, really good, then he is going to summon 20 serfs, not 10 serfs. But we'll talk about the Royal Beast Flayers themselves for a moment, because they're quite complicated. They have a variety of different models in the unit. They have a 5-up armor save, and they've only got 1 wound, and they move 6 inches. But the important part to note is that the Royal Flaymaster, so 1 model in 10 gets to be a Royal Flaymaster, and he's got a melee profile that's 2 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, damage 3. And then 2 out of every 10 models get to be an Awful Hound, a big baboon. And they have 3 attacks each, hit on 4s, wound on 3, rend 1, damage 2. That's pretty amazing as a profile. But using the Abhorrent Archregent, and because of the Serf keyword, you can summon a unit of 20 of these, which means you're going to have 2 Royal Flaymasters, which means 4 attacks at damage 3. And you're also going to have 4 baboons, which means you're going to have 12 attacks at damage 2. But I think you know where this is going. Don't forget, every unit that we're going to talk about from this point on in this book is going to be adding up to D3 attacks to it if it gets a spell cast on it. So you could have, which is pretty amazing, you could have 5 attacks on the Hunting Polearm, and you could have a unit of 20. So it would be 10 attacks at damage 3, 10 attacks at damage 3. Just think of that. If you were to stick Hoarfrost on them, it'd be 10 attacks at damage 3, rend 3. Then, for the baboons, you could have 6 attacks per baboon, making you have 24 attacks at damage 2. Insane stuff, okay? Already an insane combo that exists inside this book. Bonkers. And also, it makes sense in this book. They're very primal. Thank you to Bjorn in the chat. They're very primal. And that's the combo between the two, and how you would summon them. Okay, so follow up. Awful Hounds and Hunter's Instincts. These are 2 abilities that are on the Royal Beast Flayers like War Scroll. The first one, Hunter's Instincts. Enemy monsters within 3 inches of this unit cannot carry out monstrous rampages, which is great. In addition, reduce the damage characteristic of weapons used by enemy monsters by 1 while they're within 3 inches of any friendly units with this ability to a minimum of 1. And do not forget, this is really important, that you want to stop monsters in your enemy from doing monstrous rampages, because they are going to do Roar, which is going to shut down your ability to fight twice. Oh yeah, all of those profiles plus fight twice. Amazing. And then finally, Offal Hounds. While this unit includes any Offal Hounds, add 2 inches to the move character to this unit if they're within 18 inches of an enemy monster. So, like, an incredible unit. There are reasons that people are writing lists with dozens of these units in them. They're very cheap to buy in, but most importantly, the combo we just talked about between the Abhorrent Arc Region and them is that they're just summoned for free. So a unit of 20 of them summoned for free. Either way, you're going to be running an Abhorrent Arc Region in your army for Flesh Eater Courts, so go get yourself one and start having fun. The thing to remember, though, always, obviously, with the Royal Beast Flayers is that if you do cast Hoarfrost, you're always only going to apply it to one weapon profile. So the real question is, if you were to get Ren 3, would you want it on the 24 attacks on the monkeys with the furs and fangs and claws that do damage 2? Or do you want it on the 10 attacks coming out of the 2 hunting polearms at Ren 3 damage 3? I'm sure there's some math to do on that, and I'd like to know what you all think about that. The next unit that you're most likely, pretty much an auto-include in a Flesh Eater Courts army, is the Abhorrent Ghoul King on Royal Terrorgeist, because he is just the bloodthirst of the Stonehorn of this book. Just tons and tons of damage. 14 wounds with a 4-up armor save is not that survivable. I don't love a 4-up armor save, but we'll talk about it in a minute. He does have the opportunity to get a better ward save than the 6-up ward save he has. He has a Death Shriek shooting attack. Oh, he starts out moving 14 inches. I should talk about that if he's unwounded. And that's very fast. We already know that we could potentially get this guy to run and charge as well. So that's 20 inches. So this can be right on top of the enemy very aggressively. And that's what it wants to do. It wants to get in really quick, because it's definitely not going to survive against shooting with that 4-up armor save. It's got a Death Shriek ability, which is shooting attack with a range of 10 inches. And it does mortal wounds over the bravery characteristic that you roll when you roll a d6 and then you add its Death Shriek number to it. So it starts out as a 6, so it's 6 plus d6, then you match that against the unit's bravery, and then whatever you beat it by, it takes that many mortal wounds. It's kind of okay. It's got less effective over time because it's just not as many mortal wounds as we previously used to see, but it's still not bad in the right situation. The things to talk about here are the Ghoul King on top has got 5 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, damage 1, which isn't that scary. Skeletal Claws have got 4 attacks that are 4s and 3s, rend 1, damage D3, which is also not that scary as well. And then the Fanged Maw, which has got a 3-inch range. Now, this is super important, because when this unit charges in, it's going to have a 3-inch range on its bite attack. So you cannot let a unit be 3 inches behind your screen or within 3 inches of your screen, otherwise it could get attacked by the Fanged Maw. But as we know, with the command ability to fight twice, this unit is going to be able to pile in again. So it's got an effective range of another 3-inch pile in and then a 3-inch attack behind it. So with its first pile in, it potentially has got a 9-inch attack profile from where it charges. So that's very, very scary. Now, that's 3 attacks hitting on 4s, which is the weakness of this unit. Any minuses to hit are really going to mess it up. Wounds on 3 is rend 2, damage d6. But probably the reason that you take this model is that Fanged Maw, and it's probably the first reason to talk about it. Somehow the Fanged Maw, which is its attack profile, has got a rule called the Gaping Maw, which is if the unmodified attack for the Fanged Maw is a 6, the attack inflicts 6 mortal wounds on the target, and the attack sequence ends. Do not make a save roll. So you take this so that you can have 3 chances to roll a 6. But as we know, with the Arc Region, and now you're going to start seeing why the Arc Region is so important, you could add D3 attacks to this model. And you can add D3 attacks to Skeletal Claws, D3 attacks to the Fanged Maw, and D3 attacks to the Glory Talons. So it's going to have even more effect, because you're going to add D3 to all of those weapon profiles. That's a great economies of scale. And you're going to be able to fight twice, so it's even better economies of scale. So you could potentially have 6 attacks with the Fanged Maw and be able to attack twice. So this thing will just blow stuff up. Tons and tons of damage if you get all of the buffs and everything that you want on it. It's a flying model, so it can charge over stuff, which is really, really nice. It's got the infested ability, so if it's slain, every unit within 3 inches when it dies suffers D3 mortal wounds. It has the Royal Blood ability, so in your hero phase, you can heal up to D3 wounds allocated to this model. Now, one of the reasons we're seeing the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon taking so much in Soulblight Gravelords is because it's so survivable thanks to the hunger. This is a much older version of that. It's not anywhere near as good, but with a heroic action to also heal, you could potentially heal 2d3 in your hero phase, which is quite nice. But with 14 wounds and a 4-up save, don't expect it to survive forever. It's a wizard, and it can cast a spell and unbind a spell, and its spell is great because it's a unit within 24 inches, it's cast on a 6, and they get a 5-up ward save. So it probably wants to cast it on itself, but it may well cast it on a unit of horrors, which I think is something you might see happen. It might cast it on it. It probably won't cast it on a unit of ghouls, but it might. So a 5-up ward save is very good. And then it's got the command ability Summon Royal Guard, and like the other summoning abilities, you can summon a unit of up to 3 knights on the board. So that would be a unit of flayers or a unit of horrors that you could summon on the board. So it's just, you take an incredibly good monster anyway, and you get to summon a free unit. So you're probably going to put this guy in your list because it's just so much output. Which is really good. And you can also take mount traits for the hero mounted on a Royal Terrorgeist. There are 6 of them, if you could believe it. 6 of them, but let's talk about what they are. There's one you're going to take, but we'll talk about them all. Deathly Fast, this model can run and still shoot in the same turn. That's not good. You got Razor Clawed, improve the rend characteristics and mounts melee weapons by 1. It's not a bad shout, especially if you take him the sub-faction where every 60 hit is going to generate 2 wound rolls. Then you're going to get more rend on those as well. Not bad. Horribly Infested, when this model dies and does D3 damage, it does a flat 3 instead. That's just a bad one, don't do that. Horribly Resilient, when this model gets to heal D3, you can heal 3 instead of D3. Don't do that either. And just take Gruesome Bite. You can re-roll failed hit rolls for attack made with the mount's fanged maw. So that mount attack, that jaw attack I talked to you about, which was doing 6 mortal wounds on a 6, you can now re-roll it. So add D3, add D3 attacks, fight twice, and re-roll all those hits, just fishing for tons of mortal wounds. Probably doing more mortal wounds than Scarbrand over the course of a battle if you get it off, which is really good. The final one, Devastating Scream, is add 1 to each of the Death Shriek values, which is really bad. So don't do that. So just have the Gruesome Bite on a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, and just do a incredible. Next thing we're going to look at is the Abhorrent Ghoul King on Royal Zombie Dragon. So this is the other big monster in the army, separate to Nagash. We're not going to cover Nagash in this video because Nagash just deserves his own video, really. Or maybe I might do Nagash. But he's got 14 wounds with a 4-up save. Same things I said about the last model apply here, and he's 430 points. Now, he's kind of a buff piece to the army, which sounds odd at 430 points. He's a support melee fighter, is what he does. Now, he's got a shooting attack, which is 9 inches, and moves 14 inches as well, which is nice and mobile. And it's 1 attack, and it hits on a 3, but to wound, you roll a dice, and that dice needs to be equal to the number of models in that, less than or equal to the number of models in that target unit. So if it's got 7 or more models, it's going to auto wound. If it's got 1 model, you've got to roll a 1 to make it wound. But it's Rend 3 and D6 damage, so it's just like a nice little bonus. Other than that, they've got a bunch of melee profiles which are similar to the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, but they do not have the big 6 mortal wound attack, which is the difference, I think, between these two. It's to hit, sorry. It's the to hit, not the to wound on the Pestilent Breath. But this model does not have the more. It flies, obviously. He's got the same as a Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, where they heal in the hero phase D3. He's a magician. So I'm falling over my words there. He's a magician that can cast 1 spell and unbind 1 spell. And his spell is Malefic Hunger, and this is what makes him such a great support piece. It's cast on a 6, and if successfully cast until your next hero phase, you can reroll wound rolls for attacks made by melee weapons with friendly flesh-eating courts units wholly within 16 inches of the caster. So you sit him in the middle of several combat blocks, everyone charges in, and everyone is rerolling to wound, which is really good. But you spend a lot of points to make that happen. 430 points is an amazing amount of points. He also has got the ability to summon a unit, and he can summon a courtier. So he summons a courtier, which of the list is a Cryptgas courtier, Haunted courtier, Infernal courtier, or a Vargulf courtier. And you're going to summon the unit that makes the most sense for your army, so there isn't really a best case here. In fact, we did a little chat about exactly what courtier to summon with the Abhorrent Ghoul King on Royal Zombie Dragon, and we decided that the Vargulf is the best choice, specifically because he's able to muster, which is the healing and recursion you get in this army, all of the units in the army, and also is a pretty combat-y character, which feels like a bonus. So yeah, we are now suggesting Vargulf every time. You can take some Zombie Dragon mount traits. Don't forget, you get one free mount trait in your army, like with an artifact or a command trait, but you're probably taking the more on the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist. But you might take one on your Zombie Dragon, and these are the mount traits available. You get Deathly Fast. This model can run and still shoot in the same turn. Please don't take that. You got Razor Clawed, improve the range characteristics, mounts melee weapons by 1. Maybe that's okay, especially with rerolls to wound, meaning he's got a pretty great damage profile as long as he's not -1 to hit. Improving the rem by that is very good. Baneful Breath, you can reroll the wound rolls for attacks made with the model's Pestilent Breath. Not very good, don't hit that. Horribly Resilient, this model's Royal Blood ability allows it to heal 3 instead of D3. That's fine, but probably not that good. Necrotic Fangs, I quite like this one. You can reroll the damage characteristic roll for this model snapping more. However, you are hoping, if you do take this model, you are casting its spell, because the main reason you've taken this model is because of the spell. So you shouldn't need this to reroll its damage profile. And finally, Death from the Skies allows you to put this model into Deep Strike and then deploy it outside of 9 inches of the enemy. So, they're all okay. I think Razor Clawed is probably the correct answer. That's the one I see most in tournament lists. Improve the range characteristics, mounts melee weapons by 1. That's the one you're going to see. So that's the one you should take. The next unit we're going to look at is the Abhorrent Ghoul King. Just on foot. It's just a regular chap. Just on foot this time. He's got 6 wounds, 4 up save. He gets to heal D3 in each hero phase. Keeps him alive, which is nice. He's a wizard, and he can cast 1 spell and unbind 1 spell. And his spell is pretty good. It's Black Hunger. Pick a friendly Flesh Eater Corpse unit within 24 inches, and you get to add 1 to the attack characteristic of their melee weapons. This is exactly the same as the Abhorrent Arc Regent. So now you can add D3 to 1 and +1. So potentially up to 4 onto a single unit, or D3 on 1 unit and then 1 on another unit, which is quite nice. And his command ability is to summon a unit of serfs. And again, that can be a unit of 10 Crypt Ghouls or a unit of 10 Royal Beast Flayers. And they have to be wholly within 6 inches of board edge, 9 inches away from the enemy. So, not bad. And he basically he's 170 points. You get his points value back, and you have another way of stacking attacks onto units. So I pretty much think he's probably an auto include as well. You probably immediately just load out Abhorrent Arc Regent, Ghoul King on Terrorgeist, and this guy, and just start your game there, and then you move on, because just +1 attack is great on loads of units. The next couple of units all kind of key in with other units in the army very specifically, and they're all courtiers. So the Cryptgas Courtier is the first one we're going to talk about. He's 70 points, and he's only got 4 wounds with a 5-up armor save, so not very survivable at all. He's got a terrible melee profile, so that's not what he's here for. He's here for his ability to do Muster Serfs, which is you roll 6 dice, and then for each 2+, you can turn 1 slain model into a Serf unit, which would either be Ghouls or Royal Beast Flayers, which is nice. And you have to be within 10 inches of them as well. So that's what he does. And in addition, he's got the ability called Trophy Hunter. If an enemy model are slain by wounds inflicted by this model, until the end of that phase in which the attacks were made, add 1 to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons used by friendly serfs while they are wholly within 16 inches. So if you're able to charge in a unit of Ghouls or Beast Flayers with a Cryptgas Courtier, and then the Courtier was to attack and then wound a unit, wound a model, kill a model, then you would be able to add +1 attack to serfs in range, which isn't bad. But the problem is, in the order of activation, you would charge in, they would then fight, and then someone would attack your Ghouls or your Beast Flayers, both of which would probably lose a lot of models because they're not very survivable. So not the best thing, because it's going to be hard to pull off. But if you do pull it off, it will mean that you can add even more attacks onto those units, which is pretty good. The next unit is the Crypt Haunted Courtier. So he's the Crypt Horror, general, the captain sort of thing. He's the hero for the Crypt Horrors. He's got 6 wounds, so he's a bit beefier. He's got a 4-up armor save. got 3 attacks in close combat that are damage 3, which is kind of okay, but that's not what he's here for. And he can heal 1 wound in each hero phase. He's also got the ability chosen by the king, which allows you to reroll hit rolls for attacks made by this unit while it's within 18 inches of any friendly aberrants, which is okay and fine. But again, that's not the reason you're taking him. The reason you're taking him is because of Muster's Kings of Chosen. In your hero phase, roll 6 dice for each friendly Crypt Haunter Courtier, any 5-ups, and then you're going to be able to return a Crypt Horror. And that's honestly really cool. You could have a unit of 9 Crypt Horrors. If this guy was your general, then you unlock Crypt Horrors as battle line. There are other ways to do that as well. Then you could have a unit of 9. You could have 2 Crypt Haunter Courtiers behind them. And then you roll 6 dice for each Crypt Haunter Courtier. And for every 5+, you'll put a model back into that unit. If you also use the heroic action to also do some more mustering, or rallying, basically, you can put even more wounds back into that unit as well. So, like, there's 110 points to potentially keep bringing back a lot of wounds. Feels pretty good. The next unit is the Crypt Infernal Courtier. This is our Crypt Flayer hero. So this works with Crypt Flayers. It's got 6 wounds, 4-up save. Has got a shooting attack, which is 9 inches, force 3 rend 1 damage D3, and has got a melee weapon, which has got 5 attacks, that's rend 1 damage 2. So, like, quite nice, actually. It can fly as well, and is very fast, moves 12 inches, so it can keep up with your Crypt Flayers, which are very, very quick. And it's obviously also got the muster ability. So roll 6 dice, a unit of Crypt Flayers that's within 10 inches, and then for every 5+, you can put one of them back. So the same thing we said about Crypt Horrors, which are 4 wounds, same thing with Crypt Flayers. They've got Skewering Strike, which is also every 6 to hit with their Skewering Talons is going to do a mortal wound in addition to any normal damage. 130 points, fairly expensive, with the Crypt Flayers, which are quite weak, but same thing I said about Crypt Horrors is going to apply to Crypt Flayers, so a couple of those behind, create some big bricks. If this is your general, you're going to get Crypt Flayers as battle line. They're fine. Our final courtier is the Vargulf Courtier, and not to be disrespectful, easily the worst model out of all the courtiers, as he's 1 billion years old and made of Finecast. But he's 8 wounds and a 5-up armor save, so not very survivable. Moves 10 inches and is our smash bat, so can do loads and loads of damage. We kind of talked about that previously. You can stack different command traits and artifacts and a bunch of other stuff to make this do a ton of damage. So we won't talk about that again. Instead, we'll talk about what he does outside of that. He's got the Muster Royal Household, and he's the most expensive of the courtiers, 160 points, but he's the most flexible, especially if you can summon one of these for free. Because if he's near a unit of serfs, he rolls 6 dice, and then he 2-up, he can put a model back in them. And if he's near a unit of knights, so either the Horrors or the Flayers, then any 5+, he can put one back in there as well. So he kind of can choose between whichever one of the units he wants to try and benefit. He can benefit 2 units, but you can't benefit from the same dice roll, if that makes sense. So if I roll a 5, I can return it in knights, but I can't also return a serf at the same time. And then he's got the ability Feed on Dark Magic, with which a friendly abhorrent within 18 inches of this model successfully casts a spell. It's not unbound. You can re-roll hit rolls to this model until the next hero phase, which, as we talked about, making him very fighty is another way of making him even more fighty. He's got King's Champion, which is add 2 to the attack characteristic of this unit's model's immense claws if it's within 3 inches of 10 or more enemy models when you pick the target unit for its attacks. So if you charge it into loads of models, he's going to get a load of attacks as well. I can't wait to see what the AOS 4 version of this is like. Or sorry, the updated version of this whenever the new book comes out. Massive Vargulf, it'll be so cool. Anyway, and then the Victory Feast at the end of the combat phase. If an enemy model was slain by wounds inflicted by this model's attacks, you can heal D3. So he definitely, especially if you're summoning in a courtier, this feels like the sortier that's got the most give. Because he's got the most flexibility and is also legitimately fighty. All of the others aren't really that fighty, and this one actually will do some damage as well as doing some healing, which is quite nice. So for 160 points, honestly not bad. Also quite quick as well, moves 10 inches, can fly. Honestly, yeah, not bad at all. Just talking about how incredibly bad the Vargulf is. If you do want a really cool Vargulf STL, then Clay Beast Creations have a Vargulf STL. You can see there on my screen. So if you have a 3D printer or a friend with 3D printer, it's a great smash bat, and he would look really good on the table. Thanks to the new Harbinger's book, we have a new courtier in the mix, the Marrow Scroll Herald. He's 115 points. He's got 5 wounds, a 5-up save, and moves 6 inches. And he has got a unique ability to debuff the enemy or buff your army, thanks to his ability, the King's Entreaty. At the end of the charge phase, you can pick one enemy unit within 3 inches of this unit and say that it will offer its infected bone, or bonk. If you do so, your opponent must choose whether that enemy accepts or refuses the bone, bonk. If it refuses, the strike first effect applies to friendly flesh-eater courts units within 3 inches of this unit until the end of the following combat phase. If it accepts, the enemy unit becomes infected, bonk. For the rest of the battle, roll 2d6 before an infected unit issues or receives a command, which is really powerful, attempts to cast a spell or chants a prayer. Make that roll before the action is carried out. If the roll is greater than the unit's bravery characteristic, the unit cannot perform that action that phase. So it's kind of like a Bella Core ability or something we've seen from the Realm Lords. It's very much gross. It's got some great opportunity for some role play on the tabletops. If you would like to bring a bone and maybe offer them a bone or bonk them, but politely, like Timmy Mallet, not like aggressively, which would be quite fun. But in game terms, I'm not 100% certain how I feel about it. I think if you can position him in exactly the right place, giving all of your units always strike first is good, but I don't think there's a situation where they're ever going to accept it. Also, the debuffs it does, while you can no longer issue or receive commands, which is honestly very scary, the ability to cast a spell and chant a prayer is only going to be applying to heroes. So it feels like this isn't going to work that well unless you're fighting lots of heroes. So it's kind of interesting. I don't think for his cost, you're going to get a lot of value out of him, but we'll see. And he's also got the Don't Shoot the Message ability, which is this unit is not visible to enemy models while it's wholly within 6 inches of 5 or more other friendly flesh-eater course models. So he's not even going to be able to be targeted by spells. That means he's going to be fairly safe, and so if you did want to try and bring him as part of a melee castle, that would work quite nicely. Unfortunately, he's quite slow, only moves 6 inches, so he's probably not going to get into combat along with the rest of your army, which is going to try and be very fast at certain stages. So I think he's definitely a very high skill level piece to use, and probably not worth the attempt to use it. So the battle line unit in this army, if you're not making other units battle line, are crypt ghouls. They come in units of 10, they're 80 points, and they have had a new war scroll in this new book, the Harbingers, Dawnbringers book. I'm not sure if it's in the app yet, but eventually it will be. So they have got they're 80 points for a unit of 10. They have a champion, which means they can issue commands to themselves, so that's really good. And you can obviously take these up to a unit of 30. And that's obviously the right way to probably take this unit, because they can be bonkers. What have they got? They've got one melee attack profile, which is a range of an inch, 2 attacks each, and they hit on 4s, wound on 4s, no rend, and damage 1. They've got this Boundless Ferocity ability, which is whenever you roll a 6, you automatically wound. But if you've got 20 or more models, then you wound on a 5 or a 6. That means you don't have to roll to wound as well, which is good, so it's excellent. And then if you improve the range characteristics of these units' melee weapons by 1, while it's within 9 inches of courtiers or 18 inches of any aberrants, and you're probably going to be within range of both of those two models, especially an aberrant, because you'll have a Ghoul King running around as well. So why are these good or not good? Well, this is probably the best economies of scale unit you can find, because you can have 30. And then they've got 2 attacks each. That'll take you to 60 attacks and +1 for the champion. But as we know, we can add D3 +1 attacks onto this unit. So per model, we're going to have 6 attacks, which means from a unit of 30, we're going to have 180 attacks. They're on 25mm bases, so they can fight in 2 ranks. So you could string them out as like 2 lines of 15. Probably difficult to get all of those attacks in. But if you add other stuff on, like Hoarfrost from this GHB, then you're going to have 180 attacks, which will automatically wound on 5s and could be rend 3. So it's just a huge amount of attacks. Don't forget, there are other ways to get reroll 1s to hit, reroll 1s to wound, if you're with the right sub-factions or if you're using the right things. Yes, and you can then use a hero. Don't forget, it's not the champion that can do it. You can then use a hero to make that unit fight twice. right? So that unit of 30 can do 180 attacks, fighting twice, and that unit is only going to set you back 240 points. Now, all of the other units, you're going to spend 240 points on an art region, another 140 points for your other character that's giving you +1 attack. So you're doing a lot of other stuff to make this unit really good, but you can have multiples of these. If you run them in Mordant, then on a 4+, you can bring the whole 30 unit back, which is also pretty crazy as well. So just really good. Even if you only take a unit of 10, and if you were to stack all those buffs on them, that unit of 10 would have 6 attacks each. You'd have 60 attacks, and you could pile in attack twice for 120 attacks, which again could have Ren 3 because of Hoarfrost. So this feels like one of the best units in the game for stacking all those buffs on, but it's very spell reliant. You have to do so many spells to make that happen. And that's going to be fairly hard in this GHB because you're going to have lots of primal dice to cast, but also your opponent's going to have lots of primal dice to try and stop you. So very interesting unit. Very interesting. Like to know if you're going to take crit ghouls. They're very good. And they've got the surf keyword as well. So they key in with all those abilities that work with the surf keyword. And then they're fighting for their place to be summoned up against the Beast Flayers. Probably you're going to summon Beast Flayers because they're 115 points. So they're 35 points more expensive per 10. So you'll probably buy crit ghouls with points and summon Beast Flayers. It's probably how it'll work. But yeah, amazing unit and can do some amazing damage. Next unit we're going to look at are Crypt Horrors. They come in units of 3 and they're 110 points each. There are ways, as we talked about, with making them battle line. They got 4 wounds each and a 5 up armor save, so this means they're not very defensive. You obviously could put a Mystic Shield on them. Obviously you could also give them a 5 up ward save, so maybe make them a little bit more survivable, which is quite nice. But they're very, very cheap for 110 points. They got 4 attacks per model, and the champion itself has got an additional 1 attack. And they hit on a 4, they win on a 3, they've got no rend, and they're damaged 2, which is really, really good. Well, not really good, not good at all, in fact, in many ways. Hitting on 4 is bad. -1 to hit is bad because you're now going to be hitting on 5s, and that's going to be a real problem. They've got some special abilities. Chosen of the King. Improve the rend characteristic of the student's melee weapons by 1, while it's wholly within 9 inches of any friendly courtiers, or any 18 inches of any friendly aberrants. It's got Noble Blood, which is in your hero phase. You can heal up to D3 wounds, allocated to this unit. And it's got Warrior Elite. In the unmodified wound roll for an attack made with this club and Septic Talons of 6, the weapon has a damage characteristic of 3 instead of 2 for that attack. So how do we make this unit work? We want to give it Mystic Shield. We want to give it a ward save. And then if you stack a load of attacks on it, like we said, we can add +4 attacks. You can add a lot of, you can do a lot of damage because you can have 8 attacks per model. And then with their new 2-inch reach, they can fight in 2 ranks. But they've got no rend and they're damaged 2. You can cast Hoarfrost on them as well. But because you've only got a unit of 3, if you're adding +4 attacks, you're adding more attacks to ghouls than you are into Crypt Horrors. In a unit of 3 Crypt Horrors, if you were to add +4 attacks onto them, then you would be adding a total of 12 attacks onto the unit. But if you were to do it on a unit of 10 Crypt Ghouls, you'd be adding 40 attacks on. Which is really different. So it just feels like Crypt Ghouls are always better. Now, you could potentially use these as like a big screen front line. With the new coherency rules, a unit of 6 could string out. So you can have quite a big front line to protect your units at the back. And in addition, with all of the healing that you can get from the heroic action and from all of the mustering as well as rally, you could potentially not lose many of these models. But I'm not sure if you do a lot with this unit versus the ghouls, or I would need someone to convince me that you're doing more with this unit, specifically because you can just do so many more attacks with the other unit. And so it just feels like it's not as good. They're very cheap though, which is nice. They're very cheap. They're fast. They're faster than ghouls. They move 7 inches, which is a bit of a bonus. But yeah, those are Crypt Horrors. Crypt Flayers are units of 3 models, and they cost 180 points. And we can pretty much stop there because that's very expensive. But they're 4 wounds with a 5-up save, making them 12 wounds out across the unit. They have a champion who gets to add +1 to their attack, and they are a dual unit, so they get to like a hybrid unit. They've got a shooting attack and they've got a combat attack. The shooting attack is the Death Scream, which is 10 inches, which combined with their very fast movement, 12 inches, means they're pretty rapid. But there's lots of ways to make units in this army get run and charge and go really fast. So I don't think movement's overly an issue. But that ranged attack has got 4 attacks each, so 12 attacks across a unit of 3. Hit on 4s, win on 3s, Rend 2 and damage 1. Now that Rend 2 is pretty big. That's going to punch through quite a lot of stuff. Hitting on 4s is a bit tough, but obviously you can do all-out attack. And then they've got their piercing talons, which have got 2-inch reach, which is good, so they can fight over their own base. 4 attacks, hitting on 4s, win on 3s, rend 1, damage 1. So again, a lot of attacks, very much like with the Crypt Horrors, but with economies of scale on the spells that you can put on them to make them have more attacks in melee, is going to be worse than maybe doing it to ghouls, especially with how expensive they are. Death Scream, you add 1 to the wounds rolls for attacks made with Death Scream if the target has a bravery characteristic of 6 or less, which is quite low, and that's going to be quite rare. And then finally, they've got an amazingly cool rule called the Escort Courtier, where you can pick a unit to move in the movement phase. So you pick this unit. You can pick a friendly Flesh-Eater Courts hero that has a wound characteristic of 7 or less, that cannot fly and is wholly within 3 inches of this unit. And basically, at the end of this unit's movement, that unit can move, can be deployed within within 3 inches of this unit, wholly within 3 inches, and more than 3 inches from enemy units. So this is a really fun one if you wanted to try and move a wizard across the board, get the priority roll, and then do like a 46 mortal wound spell. That's hilarious. So I really like this. I think this is quite fun. Maybe use it to protect your incredibly important arc region. I like that idea as well. You probably would screen with these guys though, and they would die because they're only 12 wounds with a 5-up save. So I think most things will kill them. And so at that points cost, they're very, very expensive. And I probably just want more wounds and attacks on the board in either ghouls or beast flayers. It's worth mentioning that you can also obviously include in this list Royal Terrorgeists and also Royal Zombie Dragons. These are the unmounted versions, and these just aren't very good. You can take both of them as battle line if you run them in Gristlegore, and if you are going to do it, you definitely take the Terrorgeist, because he's only 260 points, with the Zombie Dragon being 240 points. So 260 points is okay. 14 wounds with a 4-up save, but it's exactly like we described with the Ghoul King, only they've got less stuff. And so you're going to want the Terrorgeist because you're going to want to try and roll the Fanged Maw and just roll multiple Fanged Maw attacks and do some mortal wounds. They obviously count as 5 on an objective as well, and they're legitimately fast, 14 inches, in their movement. And they'll probably play a lot like Stonehorns play. So we have the monster truck list in the Ogre Moor Tribes book, which is a Frostlord and Stonehorn, and maybe another one, and then also loads of Stonehorn Beast Riders. I think the points changes have made that's not quite true now. And effectively what it does is it all just runs forward on the first turn, or it gives you the first turn, and then it just runs all of its models at you, hopes it gets a priority roll, and then just deletes as much of your stuff as it possibly can in the first turn. That's kind of a neat trick. It's a fun way to play, and it's definitely a very easy way to build an army. So you can definitely just monster mash. Yeah, exactly. It's just a monster mash with just loads of dudes. So Gristlegore, they become battle line, and you throw it all forward in one big mix. There's not really much else to say about that, so I won't. But it's a legitimate play style. I just don't think it's necessarily very good. Next thing we're going to look at are the endless spells. So there are 3 endless spells for Flesh-Eater Courts. Don't forget you can only include 3 endless spells in a 2,000 point list, and you can only include 1 endless spell for each wizard that you have in your army. Endless spells are going to be much easier to get rid of in this GHB because of the ability to add primal dice, and also some of the generic endless spells are incredibly good. Go watch my endless spell tier video for that, but the best spells are easily things like Geminids, obviously. Maelstrom is really good, so you want to be cautious of those, and they're very, very cheap. The endless spells that we've got, the first one we've got is Cadaverous Barricade. It's cast on a 5, so very easy to cast, but also very easy to get rid of, because you unbind an endless spell, or dispel an endless spell at the beginning of each hero phase. And a range of 24 inches. If successfully cast, set up this endless spell wholly within range and more than 1 inch from all models and terrain features. Okay, only Flesh Eater Courts can cast this. And it's got an ability called Grasping Hands. If a model starts to move within 3 inches of this terrain feature, then you halve the move distance that they can move in that turn. That's crazy good because it's 20 points. If it was like 40 points or 50 points, it probably wouldn't be worth it. But the ability to just cast a spell, make your opponent have to waste one of their spells or unbinds or dispels to get rid of this, to stop it, and it costs you 20 points is hilarious. So you, how many spells do you have? How many are you casting buffs? That's true. I don't know. Like, it's very cheap. There are so many spells you want to cast. You definitely want to cast Hoarfrost in this army. You already want to cast a spell that's going to give you a D3 extra attacks. You also want to cast a spell that probably gives you run and charge. So adding this onto the mix, and probably also Mystic Shield and the 5-up ward. So that's 5 different spells. So you might not be taking all of these things, but they're worth talking about. The next spell is the Chalice of Ushran, and it's 50 points, and it's so good. It's cast on 6, and it's got 24-inch range. It's got an ability called the Soul Stealer. So keep track of the number of models that are slain within 12 inches of this end of spell. Considering you're going to cast it 24 inches, that gives it a 36-inch effective range. At the end of each turn, roll a dice for each model that was slain within 12 inches of this end of spell. During the turn, for each 4+, the commanding player can heal 1 wound allocated to a Flesh Eater Courts model within 12 inches of this end of spell, or return 1 slain model to 1 Flesh Eater Courts unit with a wounds characteristic that is wholly within 12 inches of this end of spell. That's insane. Double this up with a Malevolent Maelstrom for the perfect 12-inch wombo combo. But I love the idea of healing from this, and you are going to get a lot of healing. Your army is only designed to kill stuff. It's got no special rules for holding objectives. It's got no special rules for deep striking or do anything like that. Its job is just to melee murder stuff. So you're going to be able to activate this, and some of those pieces are very important, like the Ghoul King on Terrorgeist. So being able to heal this up from other units activating is very good. So probably an auto-include in your army, to be honest, because it's also going to return models to your army as well for lots of recursion. So just ghouls are going to get returned, beast flayers are going to get returned. This is amazing, so definitely take that. The last endless spell, and in my opinion, the coolest endless spell maybe out there. I love it. It looks awesome. It's loads of undead horses. Like, it's really good. It's a Corpse Bear Stampede, and it's cost 50 points, so it's quite expensive really for an endless spell at the moment. It's cast on 7, which is higher than the other two, and then it's got a range of 3d6 inches when you set it up. It's also a predatory endless spell, and it moves 12 inches. So it's going to move at the end of each hero phase, but before end of hero phase abilities happen. That's how endless spells work. They happen before end of hero phase abilities. And it's got the special rule Trampled Underfoot, which is after this endless spell's moved, roll 5 dice for each unit that has any models it passes across. For each roll that is more than the unit's wounds characteristic, that unit suffers a mortal wound. For each 6, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound, regardless of its wounds characteristic. So it just does some damage, and it's probably not as good as the other spells that do damage that are generic spells. So Maelstrom is a really good spell for doing a bunch of damage, especially for an army that should be killing a lot, which is really interesting. Also Pendulum, Purple Sun, and even Ravenax Gnashing Jaws do a lot of mortal wound damage, so they're probably worth including over the Corpse Bear Stampede. Okay, the next section we're going to talk about how to win with the army, and that's going to be pretty important. You have lots of units on the board, and you have lots of models. They're not very survivable, but they've got lots of healing, and so you should be okay on the primary, especially because, which is holding objectives, because you're going to be running across the board and beating stuff up. So you should be trying to grab their objectives and hold your own objectives. And you're medium to fast, so I think you're in an okay position. But when it comes to getting other points, which is your grand strategies and your battle tactics, those are going to be the points that maybe you fall down. So let's look at what you maybe can take. The one that you can take for your book is the Royal Delusions, and this is Growing Kingdom. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if there are at least 3 friendly Flesh Eater Courts units on the battlefield that were not in your starting army. So you summon some units and then you don't use them. Feels like a bit of a mistake in my personal opinion. I don't feel like this is one you're going to take. But then you have to go and take them from the new GHB. And there's some really tough ones in here. There really are. Like no wizards on the board. You're not going to do that because you need wizards. So I think the ones that make a lot of sense to me are control the nexus. When the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if 2 or more friendly wizard units are wholly within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield, mainly because a lot of your backline units, your abhorrent arc region, and those units at the back of the board are quite important, and they're wizards, and they'll be probably never going past the mid-board to engage, but going to be moving up to support the frontline troops. Or spellcasting savant, which is when the battle ends, you complete this grand strategy if the model picked to be your general is an Andorian locus and that unit has not been slain. And probably the abhorrent arc region is again going to be your general. He can be an Andorian locus. He can be garrisoned on top of your piece of terrain. Might as well to hit. He heals loads, so it's very hard to get rid of him. So I feel like that's probably the one that you're going to take, in my opinion. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And of course, every turn, you're going to try and score battle tactics. Let's look at the battle tactics you can play or you try to score points from in your book. And there are 3 only available, and they are not easy. The first one is Scream to Death, and that's where you kill a unit, you pick an enemy unit, and either a unit of Crypt Flayers, a Royal Terrorgeist, or an Abhorrent Ghoul King or Royal Terrorgeist kills that unit with its Screaming attack. Now, the Screaming attack for Crypt Flayers have changed in the update, and the Royal Terrorgeist Scream attack isn't that reliable. So it potentially can do it, and if you're into units with low bravery, you very much could definitely do it, but I wouldn't rely on it. So it's something to be really conscious of, and that one's going to be very hard to do. And if you're fighting an army that doesn't have low bravery, basically impossible to do. The Royal Hunt is a much more manageable one, but it requires your opponent to have a monster. If a monster with less than 5 wounds allocated is killed in that turn, then you will do the battle tactics. That's a pretty good one, but again, the opponent needs to bring a monster. And also, if you kill it with an abhorrent, that you're going to get additional victory points. There's a nice little 3 victory point swing there, but again, it requires your opponent to have those available. And then finally, you got United Court, which is where you need to grab an objective that your opponent previously controlled, but you need to do it with a unit of serfs, a unit of knights, and a courtier model all at the same time. So you need to have either ghouls or beast flayers, and then you need either horrors, crypt horrors, or crypt flayers, and then you need a courtier, and they need to go grab the objective. You can summon those units, obviously, at the start, and use those War Scroll abilities to summon those units to try and make that thing happen, which is good. But that's, again, very difficult because you need all of those resources to be in the same place at the same time. So if we take a look at the generic battle tactics, like the thing you need to remember is that you don't need to do all 8 battle tactics and all 3 book tactics. You only have to do 5 across the course of a battle. And you've got some nice options here, I think. We'll start with Surround and Destroy, which is pick 3 different friendly units on the battlefield. You complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn if each of those units is wholly within 6 inches of a different battlefield edge and 2 or more of those units are wholly outside your territory. Considering you're going to summon units into those positions, that feels like you can summon a unit and then obviously you can then wait for priority and then achieve that battle tactic fairly easy. Problem is those resources maybe won't be doing something from those board edges, but I think that's an easier one. Magical Dominance. You're going to be casting a lot of spells. You've got an army that relies on spell casting. So you complete this battle tactic at the end of your turn. If a friendly wizard unit successfully casts 1 or more spells, and none of the spells cast by any units in your army were unbound. So maybe on the first turn, you just cast a ward spell or a mystic shield. You do that outside of 30 inches of your enemy, get 2 points, move a couple of cheap ghoul units onto objectives, and then just let your opponent just move forward. A lot of the battle plans, in this GHB, you want to go second. And so you have no problem, you've got very cheap units that you can just push into the mid-board, and your army can go really fast, but it makes much more sense to try to bring a lot of your power into the mid-board immediately. So what you just want to do is just let them trade with little smaller units and then hit them with your big combo pieces, which I think is good and really fun. And then you've got Reprisal. You complete this battle tactic if an enemy unit that destroyed a friendly general earlier in the battle is destroyed this turn. Now that won't combo with the grand strategy that I think is quite good for this army, but if they somehow do manage to get your army, your general, you're going to lose a grand strat, but most of your army kills stuff, so I feel like you'll be able to go and fight them back. And then you've got Intimidate the Invaders, which I think is very much how this army plays. You can complete this battle tactic if, at the end of your turn, there are more friendly units wholly outside your territory than there are friendly units within your territory, because your army is going to go forward and beat stuff up. That's what it's going to do. So you've got some nice options there. Like, You've also got bait the trap, complete the spark tactic if 2 or more friendly units retreat this turn, and 2 or more friendly different units made a charge move this turn. You should have multiple small units, mainly from summoning and just the way your army is built. So I think you'll be able to have a couple of retreats and also a couple of fights, which I think will work really nicely for you as well. And that's everything from Flesh Eater Courts in 2023. Obviously, there's going to be a new battle tome out. It's sometime in the next 6 months. I'm going to make a lot more videos about factions, especially playing the new JHB. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you do like it, please let me know in the comments below and tell me what else you'd like to see added. I think one of the things I'd like to add in the future is maybe lists, but I think I would have to prep them ahead of time, and then also they kind of interfere with doing like my list masterclasses, so I might do that in the future, which would be really good. And I want to thank everyone on the Honest Wargamer Patreon, where I might also just put all of those list things anyway, because those guys help support me so I can do the show. But I hope this has been like a good kind of refresher for Flesh Eater Courts, and also like a good kind of deep dive of how Flesh Eater Courts work. I've really enjoyed the process. It's been really fun, and I think I'm really excited about doing 1 million attacks. Thinking about the armies and how they would, like the units and how they will play, it definitely feels like I would have to get a lot of dice, roll a lot of dice. It requires a lot of management. I feel like it's very fragile. It will take a lot of punishment, and that could be quite tough as well. You have a lot of board presence, which I think is good. Love that. Love a lot of board presence. And you have a lot of damage, which I think is really good as well. How you survive against some of the modern books, not really sure. They have a lot of damage that they can put out. But I think, yeah, it was also like a cheap army to build, like, and buy. Like, loads of those models are really easy to produce, super easy to paint, and everything else like that. So yeah, I think overall, definitely a good army to play right now with an upcoming new book coming in the future, which is quite exciting as well. So quite excited to see how it changes when we get to that. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like, subscribe, all those other things. Support the show on Patreon would be great. Yeah, thanks very much. And if you do like it, send it to your friends.